Hello everyone, welcome to iDare presents Breakfree, a safe space to unlearn and overcome habits, patterns, relationships and situations that don't serve our well-being or hold us back. Today we have with us Afifa Kauser, a counseling psychologist and the founder of Let's Talk Healing. Let's get started. How are you feeling, Afifa?
I'm excited. I am super grateful to be here. I also think it's a matter of privilege to be talking about something on the lines of mental health. So thank you for having me, and I think you guys are doing a fantastic job.
Thank you. We're so excited to talk to you as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to start off by asking you the most. I think you must have heard this question a million times, but how and why did you become a therapist?
I think there's a how and there's the why, right? How did I become a psychologist is there were a series of detours in my own journey, right? So after my 10th boards, just like any other Indian traditional family, I scored really well. So my parents asked me to take the traditional route of being a doctor. Then I told them that that's not something. I hated math, so that's not something that I wanted to do for myself. Chemistry was another subject I didn't like. And I told them I was really interested in psychology, and back then I don't think people had heard much about psychology. So they were wondering what this is about. They asked me to do more research about it, and they were still like quite persistent that I do medicine because they thought I would do good in that field naturally. I was supposed to get into medical like science, right? I was supposed to do science, and I almost got in. But I also got into the other field that I had signed up for, which was history, economics, psychology, and sociology. And I was like, no, this is it. This is what I'm choosing. This is what I'm going to do. There was also another college where I was really keen on getting in, and I didn't get in there. So I thought, okay, you know what? This is the college I'm going to, and this is the course I'm doing. Something very similar happened after 12th, right? So after 12th, I again thought I must do something on the lines of journalism.
Okay.
Because I wanted to share people's experiences. I wanted to tell stories, right? So I thought maybe journalism is something I can do. But then I think the more I studied psychology, the more I realized I wanted to do psychology. So there were these two detours very early in my college life. Then the next one was when after college, after my undergrad, I was confused, like every other graduate. I was confused. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. I was thinking if I need to do my master's, if I need to work. So I decided I'll take a break. I'll figure it out. I'll probably work, I'll intern, then I'll figure my way out. So I was in a corporate. It was a good team. I had a great time, and I just didn't see myself doing that in the long run. So what I thought initially would be a journey of at least 2 to 3 years ended up being a journey for just 1 year. I went to my manager, I told him I'm planning to quit. And his words were, bomb, like you're dropping a bomb on me. Because when I told him, he was like, are you sure? Are you serious? I said, yes. And he was trying to convince me to stay back, and he was a great manager, right? For my first job, having a manager like him was really good. And I didn't have a plan. I just knew I wanted to do my master's. I wasn't sure which universities I'm going to apply to, but I had a colleague who's now a very good friend of mine. She was like, I think this college and this course will be great for you, right? So having to choose between business and service, I decided I'll choose service. And it's only after that I realized that it's a very long journey ahead. Had I just taken the path of MBA, I would continue to work in a corporate. I would continue to have a corporate job, security wise, everything would have been great. But I don't think if that would have been as fulfilling for me, right? On the other hand, choosing service, right, doing masters in, I was specializing in counseling. So first 6 months into the course, I felt like I belong. I felt really good about studying the new concepts every day, and it was almost like enhancing what I had studied for the last 5 years. It was the very basic that I was studying in my 11th and 12th and in my undergrad. And I loved it. I loved every day of college. I loved the environment I was in, and it was quite in contrast with the corporate environment. So if I look back, right? If I look back, every time I try to deviate from psychology and being in the field of mental health, something just kept pulling me back, right? So I kind of knew at that point that maybe this is what I need to be doing, because I felt really good every time I was helping people, right? So how I became a psychologist, that's my backstory. And 6 months into the course, as I started getting to know more about myself, so our course had kind of mandated that we start therapy, right? If you're going to be a therapist, you also need to have some kind of experience
Right.
being on the other side before you sit there to work with people and their vulnerabilities. So I started my therapy, and my first therapy session, I went in. I said the most random things to my therapist. Like, I didn't know what to tell her, but I just told her what I was feeling on those days. And my therapist just gave me a blank stare throughout. It didn't make sense. It honestly didn't make sense. All I kept thinking is, why isn't she talking? Right? You read so much about therapy in your notebooks, in your textbooks, and here's a therapist sitting in front of me. All she's doing is nodding. She's not saying a word. All she said was, "Yeah, I hear you." And because I told her I was not getting sleep, I was not eating on time, she's like, "Why don't you show yourself to a psychiatrist?" Right? And also because I wasn't opening up. Like, a lot of work that we do in therapy has to do with the level of opening up the client does from their end, right? So she's like, "Okay, this girl's not coming back." So this I got to know this from my therapist very later on in
Yeah.
my therapy journey. She's like, "The first time when you came in here, I didn't think you were coming back." So it felt strange to be on the other side and to get that experience. So that was the first time I was sure, right? I knew therapy was working for me. My therapy sessions were for like 50 minutes to 1 hour. I would go on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis. So it was working for me, right? But if I were to kind of go back into my own life, right? Growing up, I was always called a very highly sensitive child, right? My father always noticed this about me. So in Urdu, there is a word that you use. It's called mizaj, right? Mizaj, if you literally translate into English, it means temperament and nature, right? So my dad always used to tell people around that uska mizaj thoda alag hai, which meant she is a little different. She is more sensitive. So be careful, handle her with care.
Yeah.
She needs to be handled in a different way. And I think that was such a big blessing for me. He has been one of those support systems throughout. But that thing that he recognized about me that probably people outside wouldn't have on the first go. I used to be called too sensitive in a very negative way. Right? So for a long time I was wondering what that was, but to know that there are certain people who get that, like my closest friends or my dad, for that matter, or I had an aunt back when I was living with my aunt and everything, so they understood this. But my dad always focused on the fact that she is a sensitive child and she needs to be handled with care, right? If there was something as simple as my mom speaking to me in a very loud tone, I would just go down, and my dad would be like, "That's not how you talk to her, If you're gonna yell at her, she's not gonna listen to you. I'll try." And then he would sit with me and he would wait for me to talk about it, and he would he just had a way of handling that, right? So I realized that being sensitive, being so attuned to the environment, right, was not a weakness that a lot of people thought, whether it's in my school, in my college, and even people I met outside in the real world. I was a lot of people were like, oh, she's so sensitive, but I realized that yes, I am, and I think that's a superpower.
Yes.
I was able to discern things that people would have probably missed. I would notice things that somebody else would have missed. And I was like, okay, I am not ashamed that I am sensitive and that I care about the world, I care about people, and I care about my own feelings too. And it's not such a bad thing. All of that, right? So, my nature growing up, being called sensitive, being so attuned to things that are happening around me. And this was never in a very people may think it's in a negative manner, but for me, it was always helpful. It always helped the way I saw the world, the way I helped people, the kind of friendships I made, the kind of relationships I had with my family, my friends, or, your teenage love, right?
Right.
So it really helped me. But what I needed, along with that level of empathy and being highly sensitive, this was also something I realized about myself as I grew up and as I started therapy, right? So what I knew, what was always like in the back burner, what was always told about me, it came up in therapy, right? So my therapist is like, you are an empathic person, you are an empath, and you are highly sensitive. So it makes sense. So I think I was 15 or 16 when I started getting into news, right? And I would read about the Muslim world a little bit because that's one of the things that was around me. Right? So I would see news about Palestine, then I would see news about something that happened locally, right? Back then there was some floods and earthquakes happening in different parts of the country and the world, and I wanted to do something about it. So I told my dad, I was like, I have to do something, and he helped me. And even my mom, she was so supportive through all of this, although her role may have taken a backseat, but I think that was also a very important role. Like my mom, she is quite an introvert, but the things she talks makes a lot of sense. And she growing up, I used to see her get sick often, but for me, she was still present for me when I really needed her, right? Like whether I became the president for road track or whether it was me getting some award, my mom would make sure she doesn't miss that, right? On the other hand, because dad would be busy, like he would be at work, he wouldn't make it to these events, but he would kind of be there in another way, where he would be the one to notice those little things about me, right? Her mood, how's she doing today? And that's one thing my dad always did with all of us. He used to ask us, how are you guys doing? Right? So all of these things, right? The way I was growing up as this highly sensitive child, and even what I used to learn growing up. So because I came from a family which was very practicing in terms of religion, my dad and my uncles or even my grandparents, right, they would tell me to read about the literature. Like, the religion is more about right thing and the wrong thing. Get to know more about it. It didn't make sense for a child. I was told to read about things beyond just understanding religion from a right perspective or the wrong perspective, that if you do this you're going to hell, or if you do this you're going to heaven. We were asked to move beyond that, right? So I used to read these stories, which were like stories for children, right? These were stories of the prophets, these were stories of the women during the time of the prophet. And the hallmark of these stories, of all these stories, was empathy, right? It's only as I got to know, as I could articulate what empathy meant, that I realized, hey, this is what I studied about, right? I used to read these kind of stories, right? How do you respond to somebody who's come with you in pain? How do you respond to somebody who's not being kind to you, right? These are the kind of stories I read. And to know there's a term to it made a lot of sense. Then I realized that across religions, empathy is the hallmark, right? Most religions talked about how to be with other people, how to lead a life, right? But unfortunately, in the present times, these things have been weaponized, right? They are used like political tools, because of which we are deprived of the actual ethical understanding, of the theological understanding, right? At this point, maybe we understand religion from a point of the sociological construct. We see it from the view of caste system, or we see it from the perspective of who is more superior, or how which religion can be used to for the political gains. But if you keep that aside, if you keep the sociological construct of religion aside, and if you look at it only theologically, you understand that there's so much you can learn from it. And if you are growing up with those Islamic values, it's going to build you different, right? I saw that as a strength for myself, and I think it's heartbreaking to see that there's so much spiritual and religious abuse that exists in a community across religions. But for me, it was my personal strength, right? So these kind of stories, like if I was in the middle of a situation, my dad and both my parents very early on taught me that don't worry much about what people are going to think. They are going to think anything they want to anyway. But yes, it's important that you treat people with respect and kindness, but make sure that you think more about what God is thinking of you, right? And He is so merciful that He would want you to be at your best, right? And He would want you to lead a great life. And all of these things, when I was in therapy, they all just came out. I don't think you realize that being a Muslim is your strength. And it just took me back to everything I just shared with you. I was like, yeah, why didn't I never think of it? So all these things that were in the back burner were just coming to the surface in therapy over a period of time. And 6 months into being in therapy, I then started my practicum. So this is the time where you start your internships. You actually start seeing clients. So we had a center in college itself where we could get people to come there, and we would offer them free services. We could go to hospitals, schools, and colleges, and we had to work with individual clients. And every time I sat in, I used to feel really nervous. Right? All I kept thinking about was what I told you today. I was like, I don't want to mess up. Right? That was something that kept playing in my mind all the time. Like, it's a life. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to mess up. And then I realized I'm just as human as the other person, Despite what I was learning, despite what I was studying, I would mess up anyway. And the good relationship in therapy is not that the therapist is perfect. It's not that the client is perfect. It's when the therapist is okay with those imperfections and they make that comfortable space for their client, right? So my supervisor would tell me, if your client is coming back, something in them is asking them to come back. So that's what you see. You don't notice the wrong moves you've made, especially so early on in your career, or even later on, right? You see that they are coming back. So there is something, right? You did something, it worked for them, and they are coming back. So I think that just put me at ease. That yes, my clients were coming back, and I had these students in college who would wait for me, who would ask for me. So there were two other counselors, a little older, but I think because I was also the ex-student of the same college, they could also relate. I could relate to them. A few years ago I was there. So they would ask for me if I didn't go. Like, I had to go only 2 days a week, but they would ask for me if I was on campus. So I knew that it's working. I knew that I wanted to serve people. I knew I was making a difference. I knew I was touching people's life in some way, and it was in a small way, right? But I think the way therapy works is like a ripple effect, right? You just put a drop, you just impact one person, but all the people that they interact with,
Oh, wow.
it's going to impact all of them, right? Because these people, they are working on their nervous systems. One of the things therapy does is it helps regulate your nervous system, right? So the more nervous system capacity you have, the better you are able to interact with people. Why do you think people get defensive, right? People get defensive because their nervous system capacity is low. They are in this phase of fight or flight. They want to flight, they want to fight, they want to flight. And what that does is it kind of brings that rudeness across. It makes them just get triggered easily. But in therapy, you're working on those triggers, right? You're giving that space to just unfold and let things out.
So I want to also go back to the part, when you spoke about your first therapy session, right?
Yeah.
And about how like you didn't know what to say, you said just whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it was very similar for me as well. Like I think I went through so many therapists before finding the one,
Right.
sort of, And I think so many people that we work with always come to us with this hesitation that we don't know what happens in therapy, we don't know if we're doing it right, we don't know what to do in our first session.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest barriers for people to come into therapy, because we don't have that kind of education on what
Yeah.
people, like, what can therapy help with? What should I do when I go into my first session, right? So these are just some questions that people like would want answered,
Yeah.
because I feel like that would help them understand the process better. What happens in therapy? Like, how do you find the right therapist?
Right. So finding the right therapist has different layers to it, right? You need to look out for the most important things, which is their credentials, right? Do they have the necessary qualifications to be working as a therapist? That's number one. And do you feel safe? Right? Are you able to talk to this person? Are they able to help you open up? Right? First few sessions is all about kind of asking those questions that will initiate the process, right? This is the part of trust building. So what happens in your first session may not necessarily be what happens in every session,
Yeah.
right? But I would say just be candid, right? Just be candid. You have been contemplating therapy and you've decided to start therapy, right? I kind of want to go back to a little bit of theory here. So there is something called the theories of change, right? There are 5 stages that lead to change, right? So there is the first stage, which is pre-contemplation, and then there is contemplation, and then there is action. So there is measuring, there is action, and then there is maintenance, right? So usually in the pre-contemplation phase, you are not going to think about therapy. You're not even going to think a problem exists, right? This is similar to being in denial, right? You don't think you need help. You think you're perfect. Everything's great. My life's good. And you just go on. But there is something that happens to you, like you're not able to sleep properly, right? Or you're not able to concentrate, or something's getting impacted, but all you're saying to yourself is everything's great. So I think it's very natural to be nervous and to be clueless, because my experience of first session may not be your experience of a first session. I would be freaking out, but you would be excited, right? So I would say just be candid, be in the present, be in the now, and just go with it, right? Just go in for the session. Don't read too much into it. Don't think too much into it. And it's great that you're thinking about going to therapy. So I think it's very important to just be candid, right? To realize that what looks like a good session for one person may not be the same for another person, right? There is no right or wrong in therapy. So if you've been contemplating therapy, I think that's a sign. You must just go for it. Because if I kind of go back to the theories of change, if I just bring in some theory here, change happens in 5 stages, right? So there is pre-contemplation, there is contemplation, there is preparation, there is action, and then there is maintenance, right? So usually when you are in the pre-contemplation phase, you think everything is great. Like, I don't need therapy. My life is great. I'm doing great. So I have no reason, and I don't have any need to go into therapy. But then the contemplation phase happens, right? Where you think there is some problem that needs to be addressed, but there's also resistance, right? Oftentimes people come into therapy when they are in that stage. So oftentimes when you see someone in therapy, they are in that contemplation, preparation and action state. Some people may even know what the problem is, right? They acknowledge the problem, but they don't know what to do next, right? You can't force someone to come to therapy, right? You can't convince someone to start therapy. It needs to kind of come from within. Yes, of course, you can give facts to somebody that, hey, this is what we see. Something looks changed. Maybe you need to talk to someone, right? So when you're going back to those theories, you see that in therapy, what happens is a client comes in contemplating on what could be the reason for what they are feeling, right? Why they are struggling. Why are they suffering even, right? And then you move from that stage of contemplation, and then you're preparing them to take action. And then you're also teaching them how to maintain that action even if they decide to end therapy, right? So it's a non-directive process, right? And this is where psychologists and mental health professionals, they are different from, like, say, talking to a teacher, talking to a friend, talking to your family member, or even talking to these life coaches, right? Those approaches are more direct, right? And they involve more of an advice. They involve more of the other person sharing in their point of view, their perspective, or sharing some facts. Whereas in therapy, what happens is you're getting a understanding. You're going into this process of self-inquiry, right? So you're trying to understand yourself better. So the difference between talking to people and going into therapy is learning to understand yourself better. So until you get to a point where you are asking the right questions for yourself, a therapist is doing that in a therapeutic setting, right? The therapist is asking you certain questions. Some of my clients tell me, hey, even outside of our sessions, it's almost like we are talking to you. It's like, same. I think that about my therapist. It's almost like I'm talking to my therapist in some situations. Yeah. And I've had a client who's told me she was about to do something or fall back into one of her old patterns, and she could hear my voice and she heard me asking her, are you sure you want to do this? So therapy becomes a place, and your therapist kind of become that voice that soften your harsh inner critic, right? Till you can become a good advocate for yourself, a voice that is assertive, a voice that understands their strengths. Your therapist is kind of able to see that and be that voice, right? And so this is also a sign of good therapy, that you sometimes feel like you're having conversations with your therapist, and that's absolutely okay, and it's good. It means therapy is working.
That's so nice what you said, and the difference that you spoke about between like a therapist and a best friend. I think we see that so much, right? And also with the media, it's like, oh, this song is my therapy. Therapy is so expensive, I'd rather talk to my best
Yeah,
friend, sort of a
yeah.
thing. And the difference between talking to a best friend and a therapist is the way you explained it is beautiful.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, the way even media advocates therapy,
Right.
right? The way it portrays therapy, it's so wrong,
yeah.
right? So,
There's so many misconceptions when it comes to therapy, right? I'd
Yeah.
love to talk about a few of them.
Yeah.
One of them being, I hear this so much, like, if he goes to therapy, he's a green flag. If he doesn't go to therapy, he's a red flag, you know? I think so many people say it. I would love to know what you think about that.
I think I've talked about this in one of my posts,
Okay.
right? So, I don't think somebody who goes to therapy becomes a green flag or a red flag.
Yeah.
Right? They are a yellow flag. So it's neutral, right? Someone's going to therapy for themselves, right? They are not going to become a green flag or a red flag. They are going there to work on themselves. And someone can be in therapy and still not be good for you,
Yeah.
right? Just I think this also kind of ties back to this hyper focus on healing and the capitalistic framework of working on yourself, this obsession with self improvement, right? There are so many other ways that people improve, right? So there is therapy that you do to just work on yourself and improve yourself, and then there's therapy that you do to address actual concerns, right? So if you have those concerns, it's necessary you go to therapy. But if you're just looking to improve yourself, there are so many other ways other than therapy that you can fall back to. So when someone says, oh, that's a walking red flag, right? I think both of these are taking therapy too far, right?
Yeah.
To say somebody is a green flag or a red flag, because so there's the whole woke culture.
Yeah.
Right? There are people who are quite liberal and intellectual who are 100% on with therapy. And then there are the other side, the conservatives, right? There are people who don't understand concepts like therapy and they're like, therapy jaisa kuch nahi hota,
Yeah.
you know? सो के उठो सब ठीक हो जाएगा.
Oh my god, the amount of times we've had like, clients come to our office and say that their
Yeah.
parents have said that. Like,
Yeah.
you know, they're like, oh, our parents, like, or like our family doesn't, or my partner doesn't know that I go to therapy
Yeah.
because they don't believe that therapy helps, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's why confidentiality also becomes so important in
Yeah.
these situations. So we have this thing on our platform called support, and it's sort of like having a friend, you know. You can vent, ask questions, express like whatever you want to. And over there we have a lot of people coming in with talking about really bad experiences they've had with therapy, right? And like they've opened up to a therapist and the therapist has probably shut them down or said something wrong and stuff like that. And you know, that's really closed them off to the idea of therapy. And for someone like that who's already taken the first step and then has had to take like 5 steps back, how would they have to like regain that trust into going to another therapist? Because obviously therapy is different for all of us, right? For some people, like the normal CBT works, for some people person-centered works. There's different types of therapy also. So how would a person who's had a really bad experience trust a therapist again?
Yeah, I think I would really like to highlight that the dark side of mental health exists, right? The capitalistic side of mental health exists too. And there are these pop psychology trends that are everywhere thanks to the internet. And all of these things can kind of come in the way of how somebody is viewing therapy, right? And then there is the other factors like colonization, white supremacy, the socio-political and economic factors, right? And a therapy session can be impacted by things which are not in client's direct control, right? In fact, if you look at the dynamic itself, there's some imbalance of power in the beginning, right? And it's the responsibility of a therapist is to make that relationship more egalitarian, right? Yes, of course, people are having horrible experiences in therapy. I've had clients who've come to me after having bad therapy experiences. To some clients, maybe I wasn't a good fit, maybe they found someone else, right? So it's very important to understand what's a bad therapy session versus what's a red flag, right?
Yeah.
And that is different for every person. So for me, I think acknowledging that the dark side of mental health exists is very important. Just like how there are bad doctors, bad cardiologists, or bad orthopedic doctors, it's so important to understand that bad psychologists are out there too, right? But suppose you're visiting a cardiologist, right, and that cardiologist wasn't able to detect the problem. You're not going to try to delay visiting a cardiologist, right? And I don't like bringing in the physical health and mental health aspect together, because I do think there are certain fundamental differences between
Correct.
a mental illness and a physical illness in terms of urgency,
Yeah.
right? If it's a physical illness, it needs to be tended to then and there, right? Whereas when it comes to a mental illness, it's also urgent, but it can also be delayed, right? Whereas so for example, you're going to a cardiologist and they misdiagnose you, which is rare, but it happens. So what then, right? So you think to yourself that are there no other cardiologists, or are you going to search for the next best cardiologist in your
Yeah.
city and go to them, right? So, and that cardiologist may have done great procedures for other people, but he just didn't work for you, or she just worked for you. So it's so important to know that just because there are therapists who are not a good fit for you, it doesn't mean that therapy is not for you, right? Therapy is for everybody, and everybody needs to be able to find that right fit. But I say it's a multi-layered problem. The dark side of mental health is a very multi-layered problem, and this is where I want to kind of highlight intersectionality, right? It's so important for therapists to remember the intersections that people come from, right? So there are intersections based on gender, religion, race, class, caste, and the abilities, the capacities that people operate from, right? So it's so important to keep all of those things in mind, and to remember that the dynamic in the very beginning is quite imbalanced. So therapists, because of their knowledge and experience and skills and expertise, obviously has more hold and more power in that relationship. So it's important to share and balance that power, you know. It's the job of the therapist to do that, right? Because a client comes in, they have no idea, there's already all the stigma, they've taken this leap of faith, and they saw this as probably the last option to
Correct.
help themselves, right? So being as sensitive, and I think this has more to do with factors which are beyond client's control, right? Like the expertise of a therapist. How informed are they about the socio-political and historic realities, right? Colonization. Because of colonization, treatments have been influenced by colonization and white supremacy structures, right? Capitalism, patriarchy, all of these things have influenced the mental health landscape as well.
Yeah.
So it's important for the therapist to kind of navigate this in their own learning journey, right? On the other hand, for people who are facing bad therapy experiences, I would say break up with your therapist. Right? Break up with your therapist. It's gonna hurt like it's a breakup, but you need to break up with your therapist, right? And start looking for other options. There are a lot of good therapists out there.
Yeah.
As much as you had a bad experience in therapy, you deserve a shot, right?
Yeah.
It's not much about the therapist. You deserve that shot, right? And if you know something's there that needs to be addressed and worked on, it's it's part of you exercising your autonomy to not just find the right therapist, but to break up with your therapist when therapy is not working for you.
Yeah.
Right? So it's both. Some things that I say are things you need to look out for is that a therapist has the credentials, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
Right? And even after having credentials, someone could be a PhD or a PsyD holder and they could still not be the right fit for you. They can have 10 other extra certifications and they still may not be the right fit for you. So look at the relationship you have with your therapist. Are you able to share anything or everything you want to with your therapist? Or are you facing that resistance that I can't talk about this to my therapist?
Yeah.
Right? Are you feeling judged and criticized by your therapist? Right? The reason I'm a therapist and not a lawyer is because I'm not here to sit and pass judgments. Right? I'm here to process and navigate life for you in a non-judgmental way.
Yeah.
Right? So empathy is at the top. You have to be empathetic. So on that, right, just like every field, every service field has narcissists. Therapists can be narcissists too, right? There could be therapists who are narcissists, so they are in therapy. They are therapists. They are in the field because it serves them more than it being about the client. So one of the ways you do that is you differentiate that is by seeing if therapist is making something about themselves.
Yeah.
Right? If they are not taking accountability when you're calling them out. Right? Are they able to apologize, or are they making it about you again? Right? Some of my very close friends have had, being therapists, they have had horrible therapy experiences.
Yeah.
Right? But they were able to differentiate between good therapy and bad therapy because of the sound knowledge and the background they come from.
Yeah.
It may not be the case for the general population. Right? So I feel bad therapy experiences are unfortunately due to factors which are beyond a client's control, but exercising autonomy and kind of trying to get that control back is by breaking up with your therapist. You can give it a few sessions, but if you leave every session not feeling good, feeling more misunderstood, not being heard, not feeling like going back to therapy or feeling worse, right? Yes, part of therapy is not all roses.
Of course.
Right? There are going to be some sessions where you are going to feel bad, but you will feel like still going back.
Yeah.
Right? But if you just don't feel like, just trust your intuition. Right?
Yeah.
I think there's so much importance our societies in general give to our head that we forget that we are this entire body. Right? Sometimes our intuition is speaking to us. So if you feel like this is not the right fit, if this is not a good therapist for you, just break up with your therapist.
Yeah. The way you said break up with your therapist, I think so many of us need to hear that, right? I wish I heard that at that point, like when, I was going through 2-3 therapists,
Right.
and then like I was just like, what is going on? Like I kept feeling like unheard. Like I had one of these like really nightmarish sessions where it was my first session with this therapist, and I think I must have spoken for 5 minutes. Like it was the first session and she probably asked me something and I responded, and then it went on for a 45-minute long lecture about how I should wake up in the morning and make my bed because people from my community don't do that. And I was like, what?
That's
what
a classic
happened?
Example of your therapist judging you.
Exactly.
Speaking and deciding on your behalf.
Yeah, because I had little knowledge that maybe this is not what a therapy session should look like. But I think with the amount of misconception and myths around therapy, especially what you see in media, right? And on Instagram and stuff like that, it's very difficult to know,
100%. 100%.
What are some of these myths that, probably clouds our judgment about what therapy is?
Yeah, I think first of all, there are some obstacles to seeking help,
Yeah.
and then there is this whole media misrepresentation, and these are factors which are beyond a therapist and a client's control, but often tend to influence the way people access support. Right? Like I mentioned about the challenges of civilization, one of the main challenges of the 21st century are mental health challenges, right? But because the media has for a long time misrepresented therapy, for a lot of people, that becomes their idea,
Yeah.
right? They are a lot of people have this myth that only crazy and mad people go to therapy. But let's just be honest here. I think to an extent we are all mad,
Yeah.
right? There's a very famous psychologist who says this famous line that the only normal people you know are the ones you don't know very well.
Yeah.
Right? So once you get to know people more and more, you know that we are all some sort of crazy, right?
Yeah.
To be a human being means to exist in these complexities,
Yeah.
which means that no one's perfect, and to say that only mad people go to therapy is a taboo. It's a myth. I think what's important to understand is that if somebody is going out there to seek that support, I think it's very brave and courageous. So it's important that we support them.
Yeah.
Right? The other obstacles. So there is the myth. There are these taboos,
Yeah.
and there are these actual barriers. A mental health treatment which is very whitewashed. What do I mean by whitewashed? By that I mean the Eurocentric way of doing therapy,
Yeah.
or the very Western way of doing therapy, right? Our cultures are quite in contrast, right? We come from collective cultures. Therapy began in cultures where individuality was given more preference, right? While both these cultures have their pros and cons, what therapy looks like in India may not be what therapy looks like abroad.
Correct.
Right? Here we need to keep other factors in mind, right? There's more preference given to family over self.
Yeah.
So 100% there's going to be a problem if somebody wants to start therapy, because the family structures get impacted because of therapy, right? And it's important to remember that there are different types of family structures, right? But a good therapy will kind of help you establish relationships in a way that feels safe for you, right? So you're not moving from being so close knit in a family setup to being so differentiated and so individuated that you don't need anything
Yeah.
else, right? Because you do need other things in your life outside of therapy. So the things that helped people before, right? Family structure, economies, policies, the different things that kind of helped people to make sure that their mental health is in place have kind of collapsed. We are seeing the worst of health crisis, right, with physical health, right? Since pandemic, I think most people are living with that baseline anxiety.
Yeah.
Most of the times, right? The economies are crashing. There are more and more people getting unemployed, and the family structures, because of urbanization, industrialization, colonization, the family structures changed over a period of time. And if you make that analysis from 30 years to now, the way families are functioning are so different in the present, right? So earlier people would fall back onto these systems. They would fall back on the job security, the comfort of the family. They would fall back on these healthcare systems to kind of help them.
Yeah.
But when all of these systems are crashing, they definitely impact your mental health, and they definitely become a barrier to seeking help as well. Because, for example, family, right? The place which was supposed to be the primary place for all your resources, now suddenly one day you're waking up and saying, I'm going to a therapist. The family internalizes that as a problem, right? But it's important to remember that therapy is something that you do for yourself, not against anybody.
Correct.
Right? So a lot of our family structures are more close knit, right? A healthy family structure would be democratic family structure where there is room for different opinions and thoughts, and there is collaboration, there is mutual respect, there is mutual decision making and mutual negotiation. But oftentimes in collective societies, and especially because I work mostly with the Indian population, the family structures look more vertical, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of power imbalance in the family structures, right? So for a lot of young clients, their main obstacle to therapy is family, the lack of support from family, right? Or the general notion that family should be the place where everything needs to happen.
Correct.
Right? And being quiet about your struggles, right? A lot of these are stemming from the culture, from the family values, that if you suck it up, if you don't talk about it, if you ace through something difficult, then you are the hero. And a lot of people want to be these sacrificing heroes. But I would say kind of take that step back, get over that, and just seek help,
Yeah.
right? It's so important to understand that because our family structures are sometimes vertical and may not be as healthy a place as many would like, it's important that you still do what you need for yourself without all the time thinking, what is my family going to think about this?
Correct.
Right? So yeah.
I think what you said about the seeking help part, right?
Yeah.
That if you like, it's not a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
No, it's one of my favorite quotes as well, that seeking help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign that you're not willing to give up.
Yes.
No, and that's the beautiful part. And the part where, like, we spoke about how therapy doesn't have to be like, oh, it's going to break up your family, because I heard that so much from like so many of our clients, that their families think that, oh, just because now she's going to therapy, she's going to break up the family.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. But actually, good therapy will help you enhance safer relationships in your life,
Yes.
which is beautiful, right?
Yes.
And it's meant to do that for you. So I think the benefits of therapy are innumerous if it's done right, for sure, right?
Yes.
Before we let you go, I want to ask you something.
Yes.
So we have this thing called an iDare moment, okay? What I mean by that is, there's this another misconception about therapy, which is it's all roses and it's all like, it's a calm room where the minute you go, you'll start feeling better.
Yeah.
Whereas it is a very safe space and it can make you feel
Yeah.
beautiful and better.
Yeah.
It's also something that you need to put a lot of
Effort.
effort, and you need to work towards it. And it takes a lot of
Yeah.
courage. It's not as rosy as it seems, right? So that's why we actually named it iDare, because whether it's standing up to abuse or whether it is seeking the help you need, these are all things that require courage. So that's why we call iDare. So what is one such moment in your life that you could be like, okay, I dared to do this, or I've dared to do this?
I think for me, that is being able to stand up for somebody else when
Yeah.
they couldn't, right? Being voice for somebody till they could find that voice for themselves. And it could be in small situations and it could be in big situations. But I think I am proud of that, and I dare to stand up for people, right? I dare to continue to speak against the injustices that are committed against humanity. I dare to speak up against these structures that discriminate based on gender, because I'm a woman, that discriminate me because I'm a Muslim, or that discriminate me because I'm a certain age or I look a certain way, right? So I think my iDare moment is not giving up my voice.
That is so beautiful and powerful. I think, just listening to you, I feel like I'm ready to like.
Yeah, I think using your voice, I don't think people understand how powerful that is, but I think for me that's my iDare moment,
Yeah.
using my voice. And whether it's my own people or whether it's strangers, people may say that, oh, she's being too much of a feminist or she's being too much of an activist, right? But it's not about that. You don't want to be an activist,
Yeah.
you don't want to be a feminist, but you are not going to tolerate injustices against humanity, the basic. Here I'm not talking about differences of ideologies, I'm not talking about differences of opinions, but there is actual discrimination that is taking place, right, towards yourself or towards somebody else, right? I've done this even in my personal relationships. I have used my voice to talk about how I have felt in relationships, and even if that has not led to the relationships I would have liked to have in my life, even if that has not gifted me with the beauty of certain relationships, I think in the end of the day I'm living with my integrity.
Yeah.
There's so much that comes to my mind when I say use your voice. Your voice is powerful, and unless you don't talk about it, it's going to continue to have power over you.
Yeah.
But you need to use your voice in order to make sure it loses that power. The more you don't talk about something, the more power it holds on you and your life and everything that you do in life. So using your voice, yes, a lot of times people have spoken up and people have faced consequences of it. I'd rather face the consequences than let that thing that's bothering me so much hold that kind of power that I kind of lose myself in the process, right? So living with that integrity, that it's important that we speak up, and we speak up for people who are yet to speak up for themselves. We advocate for those people, and we teach people that it's great to have a voice.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's powerful.
Yeah, I think what you said, I dare to use my voice, is so powerful. And it inspires so many people as well to use theirs.
Yeah.
The minute I see someone like speaking up against something that I also personally strongly believe in, it gives me the strength to speak up. And whether that's speaking up to my own family or to something much bigger, I think just watching people do that is so empowering as well.
Yes. And there will be consequences.
Yeah.
People will want to silence you. People will want to cancel you. That's not the concern. What you're doing is you have demonstrated courage.
Yeah.
Right? You have finally, after many years of not using your voice, you have done it. You may have not done it perfectly, but you still did it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think boils down to courage, whether it's using your voice or going to therapy.
Yes, 100%.
Or breaking free from these notions and ideas that, therapy isn't for me or therapy isn't for everyone. All of these misconceptions around it. I think with that, I would love to come to the end of today's podcast. I'm really grateful for everything you shared today. I think I learned so much. And there's so much I'm going to take back, to think about, and so many points where I felt like, oh my god, I feel you, I get that. So thank you. I actually felt so seen and heard today.
I had a great time, and thank you for having me, and I'm so grateful platforms like iDare exist. You guys are doing a phenomenal job helping people. I think abuse is a whole topic altogether, but what you are doing in the field, right, in the field of mental health and with abuse, I am so grateful that it exists.
Thank you, that means so much. Thank you everyone for listening and being here today. We hope you can break free from anything that's holding you back. And for the time being, you have us. If you ever need anything or need someone to talk to or need therapy, Afifa's handle on Instagram is at Let's Talk Healing, and y'all can reach out to her on that. And you can always reach out to us on at iDare_org. We also have an app where you can get support, therapy, legal advice, safety, or read articles and stories about people who've done amazing work like Afifa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much everyone for listening, and thank you Afifa once again.
Thank you.